It's so good to be with you again. I was here in the summertime, and I just want to thank Pastor Doug just for inviting me back. My wife, just to introduce it just a little bit more, my wife Gail and I were just in a season of church planting and hopefully launching something next year within the Riverside South vicinity. We just believe that God is awakening hope in this area, and it's such an incredible time to contribute to the great work that God is already doing. I mean, if you were at One Church, One Heart event, you could just see the great work that God was doing even through that. And there's a lot of unity, well, from my perspective, among pastors and churches in the South End. And so it's just a fortunate time to just be part of this, especially as the population here is growing, right? It's just continuing to grow. So it's very exciting. Okay. I got a funny joke for you, which is actually a true story. Who's been to Mountain Orchards? Anybody? Okay, so we went there last week for the first time with some friends from church. I'd never heard of this place. They were just like, hey, you guys should just come and hang out. So that's the first question. How many of you like dad jokes? Lame jokes, puns? Okay, I'm gonna put it together for you. So we went with a group of friends, and I go up to the cashier. All right, I got my wife with me, my daughter, friends from church. I'm holding the big bag of apples, and I got this joke just wired up inside of me because I see it says you can pay cash, or you can pay debit or credit. And I go up to the cashier, and I said a joke to her that she'd never heard before. I was like, "Do you take Apple Pay?" and then she smiled and she's like, "Yeah, we do." And I'm like, "Okay. How many times do you hear that joke?" She's like, "What?" I'm like, Apple Pay. Oh! And then she laughed. I was so proud of that dad joke. I mean, that was an original. We're driving home on the 416. 25 minutes into it, I burst out laughing, and Gail looks at me like, "You're still laughing at that?" It's Tuesday, I'm still laughing at that. All right, let me go to my next slide. So here's Sunday. This is not the title of my sermon. This ties into a little bit more humor. So Sunday school, a different perspective, some funny things there. There's the teacher. God bless teachers for teaching Sunday school, children's ministry. Do angels sweat? Does Jesus have a middle name? Could David beat a robot? Did the ark smell bad? That's a valid question. Are there peanuts in heaven because I'm allergic? Do you ever look at Sunday school stories and sometimes you might see it from a different angle? Or maybe you were taught some of these things through Sunday school or camp, or maybe you taught them. And sometimes, you see them from one vantage point, but then we see the initial story and we see how they fit into God's overall story and inform our understanding of the gospel. And at the same time, you might find a little twist. You might find a perspective. You might find something that maybe didn't make it onto the flannel graph or the puppet display. I have a toddler, and she's 4, right? She's in junior kindergarten, learning things, asking me all sorts of interesting questions at bedtime when I'm reading stories to her, right? Reading this little toddler Bible picture book thing. And so we're excitingly reading the one about David, Goliath, and I'm getting pumped up about the story about he took him out with a slingshot. And then there's a cartoon in the book of Goliath lying on the floor. And he's got just a little bit of red, just a little bit of blood on his forehead. And she's like, why is he lying down? Isn't it sad he can't get up? Ugh. Or we're reading the one about Daniel in the lion's den and talking about how, just to paraphrase, Daniel had to go stay with the lions because he got in trouble for praying, but the lions didn't hurt him because God protected him. So then she asks me, she's like, well, when Granny took me to the zoo, my mom lives in Toronto, she took her to the Toronto Zoo, the lions were behind a glass, so if I pray, can I go pet them next time? I don't know how to answer that question. Then at church, they had this summer day camp. This story is way too funny. And they had 4 different lessons that they were covering throughout the week. But on the second day, it was about Jesus' death and resurrection. So we're sitting down for supper. There's me, Gail, Grace, Teller, and she looks at me, and again, we were learning about Jesus' death and resurrection. She'd just been learning about that. She's like, is Mama gonna die tomorrow after supper today? And we all were I was fuming, and the Lord was like, calm down. She just was at day camp, and And then she says, but then she'll rise again. And so it's so humorous because she's seeing things from a different perspective. And I got to remember, she's 4, she's curious. It is hilarious. And today, I'm going to dive into the Prodigal Son story, but I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. In the Prodigal Son, the story, the text is in red, which means that Jesus is speaking. And so this passage is found in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. In the chapters leading up to this moment, Jesus is teaching large crowds what it means to follow him. He's calling for full surrender, telling of a banquet where the unlikely are welcomed in. He's confronting religious leaders of their hypocrisy. And then we get to Luke chapter 15, and the tension is rising. So now the Pharisees are grumbling because Jesus is eating with sinners from their perspective. And in response, he tells 3 parables. One of a lost sheep, one of a lost coin, and then it culminates to this one about a father and his 2 sons. Now the story, which is a beautiful story, it often focuses on the return of the prodigal son, where Jesus spoke about a man who had 2 sons, and the youngest wanted his share of his father's estate before he died. It's profound because it's almost as if he saw his father dead and wanted his share of the wealth now. He's like, here's my crypto wallet, Dad, like right here, right now. In Jewish culture, asking for your inheritance early, again, it was essentially wishing his father dead. So his actions would have shocked and dishonored not just the father, but the whole family. The son then leaves, moves far away, wastes all his money living in the wild. You can only imagine what he spent it on. However, a great famine comes over the land and he begins to starve. He's hired by a local farmer, ends up working a job feeding the pigs, so hungry that even when he was feeding the pigs, looked yummy to him. I mean, that's how desperate he was. Jesus is getting so creative when he's telling this story. He comes to his senses, perhaps swallows up his pride, and then realizes, you know what, I think I should go home. His father then sees him in the distance, runs to him, and welcomes him with open arms. In this story, in Jewish culture, the honor-shame culture that Jesus is speaking into, the father running to his son would have been scandalous, because older men didn't run. The son even felt as though he was not even worthy to be called a son. But his father embraces him. They celebrate with a feast. The father says in verse 24, "For this son of mine is dead and now has returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found." This is such a beautiful story of a son who had left, rejected his father, demands the inheritance, leaves, tries to do life on his own, blows all the money, and then returns home to be welcomed back with a great feast by his loving father who had forgiven everything. Pops hooked him up and put a ring on his finger, sandals for his feet. The calf they had been fattening gets killed for the feast, all in celebration of the son's return. Welcomed home in such a beautiful and a redemptive way. It's such a profound example of how the Father's compassion is even more radical and underscores a shocking nature of grace. And in many moments when you hear this story, this is like a great place to wrap up, but there's more. And here's a fun perspective of it.
Guys, so I just took my inheritance and dipped. No plan, no map, just vibes in a bag. Pray I don't go broke in 2 days. This party is crazy. I spent like half my bag tonight, but honestly, worth it. No rules, no curfew, just vibes.
Morning. Yeah, last night was wild. Not gonna lie, I don't have much money left. Like, it went fast. Kinda thinking I should slow down.
Little update, I did not slow down, and now I'm starving. I'm hungry. I'll do anything for something. Even that. I never thought it'd get like this. I think I'm going back. Not as a son, just a worker. Anything's better than this. All right, guys, I'm heading home. I don't expect anything. I messed up. If my father lets me work, that's more than I deserve.
Update, I'm alive, I'm fed, and somehow not disowned. Bro didn't even care that I wasted the whole bag. He was just hype I came back. Man said, forget the money, let's eat.
All right, guys. Blew the money, lived with pigs, still got welcomed home. Grace is wild. Like and comment if you'd take me back too.
Isn't AI crazy? The screen recorded that off of Instagram, just the last bit. Like and comment. I've titled today's message, it's the Prodigal Son, but I've titled it Found in the Field. And before I read the passage, I want you to picture this. A son who has never left home, stayed faithful, but now stands outside the celebration. And in this story, we see a father who steps out to meet him, even there in the field. I'm going to read Luke chapter 15, 25 to 32. And this is the rest of the prodigal son story, focusing on the older brother. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. But he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf? His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. The audience that Jesus is teaching to, the ones who were identified as tax collectors and sinners, you see, they very likely would have resonated with the younger son who wandered far away and went off. Now, the Pharisees, they may have seen themselves more closely aligned with the older brother. They're so bitter to the point that grace is being extended to, by their standards, those they essentially deem unworthy. And so Jesus, he's likely brilliantly telling this story with two audiences in mind. He's inviting the lost home, but he's also challenging the self-righteous. And this is kind of the part of the message I want to touch on today. And the angle I want to focus on is from the perspective of the older brother. Because this right here, this is a faithful son. Might have had elements of a wounded heart, kind of that silent buildup of pain. But it's beautiful at the same time because it's an example of someone who was found in the field. Now, a bit of a humorous angle is, there's also another different angle. Because I had wondered jokingly if the fattened calf that had been killed, which was now going to be enjoyed in a feast, actually got the short end of the stick. Can we just have a moment of silence for the fattened calf? Nobody asked him how he felt about the reunion. One moment he's minding his own business, and then boom, celebration brisket. You have the prodigal who gets a party, the father gets a hug, the older brother gets offended, and the fattened calf roasted, literally. Well done for all the wrong reasons. Did I tell you I love dad jokes? Did I say that? But if we're being honest, the one who felt like they got the short end of the stick was the older brother. Because he wasn't the one who ran away. He stayed. He worked hard. He followed all the rules. But when grace showed up for someone else, it exposed something in him. So is it okay if we talk about that a little bit? Because sometimes we don't even have to leave home to lose sight of the Father's heart. But, in some ways, I kind of read this story and it's hard to have empathy for the dude. Because I think we should be celebrating someone who was lost and they've now returned. But if I was to have some empathy, I would think, well, maybe there's just some anger in him where he's so upset to the point that he won't even go and celebrate. And his daddy's begging him. And the older son, he then says, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never even gave me one young goat for a feast with friends. Yet when this son of yours, I don't know if you can hear the sarcasm or the tone in the language. Almost like he doesn't even feel like his younger brother who he was saying was out squandering daddy's money with prostitutes, and now it's like the younger brother's being celebrated with a feast. And so there's this tension. The older brother's kind of coming across as this noble narcissist, being self-righteous and entitled. But if I was just to try and have empathy and maybe level with him a little bit, perhaps look deeper, we can see that his faithfulness to his father might have been feeling lonely. He's doing great things, but did he feel as though no one noticed? It's not like he was disobeying or in rebellion, but he might be feeling rather unseen. He's kind of now outside the party. You ever wrestled with this? You ever felt uncelebrated for staying grounded, for staying steady, and for doing the best you can and it goes unnoticed? Perhaps we might feel like this in our workplace or at home. If you feel as though your faithfulness doesn't matter, I truly want to encourage you and say that your faithfulness matters to God. So invite the Lord to tend to your tired, unnoticed places, because you don't have to stay strong alone. You have direct access to the one who is noticing your faithfulness. And it's important to take this to the Lord because we don't want this unspoken disappointment to cause us to grow distant from others. Not like where we just stay in our own lane and do our own thing, but allowing the unspoken disappointment to get to a point where we might even grow distant from God. In verse 28, it says, he became so angry, he refused to go in. Like, that's how much disappointment in the story that Jesus is telling was bottled up in him, to the point where it wasn't just sudden anger, but perhaps a buildup of silent pain. However, God is big enough for your disappointment, because I think a loving father would rather hear it than have you drift silently. Because I gotta hand it to the father who could have said, fine, you don't want to come celebrate? Then go ahead and starve. Okay, that's a line from Beauty and the Beast. But instead, we see the father pleading with him. God would rather hear it from us than have us drift silently, because he can handle our disappointment. As sometimes those of us who have been faithful, we might not even know how to express our unmet expectations. The invitation here is to bring our disappointments to God because he's not angry, he's listening. And if I may be even more honest with you, I think when I even read the older brother's words, while I try to have empathy, there's a big part of me that doesn't even feel judgment. I think in some ways I feel a sense of familiarity. I know what it's like to be faithful and still feel like you're outside of the party. I served in the military. Remember I showed that last time, and I gave it everything I had. Physically, mentally, emotionally. I didn't walk away on my own terms. I was medically released after 13 years. And to be transparent, that hurt. It's like a part of me was cut off because of how much my identity was very much tied to that role. I'm still healing, not just emotionally, but even physically from injuries that happened while I was serving here at home on Canadian soil. They weren't battlefield wounds, but they were real. They left a mark. I think sometimes the pain we carry from serving faithfully, especially when it's domestic or unseen, it can almost feel easier to minimize. But I've learned that God doesn't minimize it. It's a wound that took time to admit to God, as I didn't even realize I was carrying it. One of the elements why this story speaks to me. One of my biggest dreams I ever had since I was a little boy was to become a pilot. And so I pursued it with passion. I worked hard since I was young to make that dream a reality. And for a while, I got to live it as a career. But when a dream dies, it doesn't just fade away, it leaves a scar. And I found myself asking God, for many years, I've tried to follow you. Why would you allow this part to be taken? Another moment that left a mark where in one church almost 10 years ago, two people told my wife and me that they didn't want to get too close to us because we were a military family. They said, you'll just be gone in a few years. It's too painful to build a relationship we know will end. You know, in that moment, I felt disposable, like our presence, our desire to belong didn't matter. We'd only been at this church for a few weeks, and we still ended up getting heavily involved in ministry. I ended up pastoring there for a year and a half. But honestly, I felt like the older bro, because I wanted to be faithful. I wanted to be present, try to belong. Another reason I connect with the older brother in this story is because growing up, I didn't have the kind of close, affirming relationship with my dad that I now see in this parable. Now, my father has since passed, and I realize now that some of the distance between me and him, it left me wondering if I was truly seen or celebrated. But that's why this part of the story, it moves me so deeply. I mean, the father leaving the celebration to come out into the field, looking his son right in the eye, saying, "My child, you are always with me, and all I have is yours." Hear the Father saying those words. Jesus is showing us the kind of Father God is, one who steps towards us in our faithfulness, even when we feel unseen. And that picture is healing something in me that I didn't even realize was still wounded. Now we find ourselves stepping into church planting, a calling I didn't see coming, but I know. My wife's nodding, yeah, exactly, we didn't see it coming. My wife, but it's like we know it's from God. But still, if I'm keeping it real, I carry the stories, the scars, the questions, and I've realized if I'm not careful, I can bring my wounds with me like the older brother did. I can serve with faithfulness, but under the iceberg, we've seen that analogy of Pete Scazzaro, who talks about emotionally healthy spirituality. The iceberg is this, and underneath there's so much I can be guarded, disappointed, or even bitter. The older brother in this story, he wasn't evil. He might have just been hurting. And I think the reason why Jesus included him in this story is he knows that people relate to this. And there may be some of us who are here today. We've stayed, we've served, we've obeyed. But we have just not felt seen. While there's areas where I'm still learning, I've learned that the Father doesn't just run to the prodigal. He walks toward the faithful one with the aching heart. The Father comes out for the faithful, and we have access to him. I mean, just in verse 28, again, we see that the Father pleaded with him. He's literally trying to pursue him and beg him to come and join the party. He's like, "Son, it's such a good party. We got your favorite rapper out here. We got Forrest Frank in the house. They're doing the dance for Talk Tick. Lord, I lift my hands. I give all my praise to you." You know, he didn't know Talk Tick, Tick Tock. He was a dad who messed up. You know, probably used the thumbs up emoji app in text messages just one too many times, right? Like he was just trying. But it's such a beautiful moment in this story. Because just like he ran to the prodigal, he goes out to the older brother. The reminder and encouragement for us is that God pursues you, not just when you mess up. Just hear that. He doesn't just pursue you when you mess up, but he pursues you when you're misunderstood, when you're hurting, or you're feeling stuck. You're not forgotten in the field, and God is moving toward you. In verse 31, the text says, "Son, all I have is yours." Imagine him just looking at you and saying, "All I have is yours." The older son was never without the father's resources, but he still didn't realize that joy was available. And that joy is not just for the prodigals, it's for you too. And Jesus ends the story, next we go on to Luke chapter 16, without telling us what the older son did. I mean, we don't really know. We don't know how the older brother responded. We don't know if the next day son had a talking to with the younger son and was like, "Boy, don't you ever do that again," right? Like, we just don't know. And it's because I believe that the story isn't finished. In conclusion, as the title of the message is called, Found in the Field. Number one, for faithfulness that feels unseen, God notices what others overlook. The older brother stayed loyal, steady, and obedient, but he still felt overlooked. He says, all these years I've served you. Do you hear that? It's the cry of someone longing to be noticed. And maybe you've been there showing up for family, your job, your faith, yet left out, standing on the sidelines while others are celebrated. Here's the hope. God notices what others overlook. Your faithfulness is not forgotten, and it matters so deeply to him. Number two, for quiet burdens that create distance, you see, unspoken pain, it can pull us away, but God draws near. In verse 28, when he refused to go in, I don't think it's this buildup of sudden anger, but just something over time. And often our hearts, they don't rebel loudly, they drift quietly. We keep serving, but you might feel far inside. You know, in leveling with you, like I've felt this through injuries from my time in the military, dreams that collapsed, perhaps father wounds the Lord is still doing a great work in me, and even moments of feeling overlooked in church. And what I've learned, God would rather hear your disappointment than watch you drift. Your quiet burdens don't push him away. They pull him toward you. The Father who meets you where you are, he steps toward you, even in the field. The Father went out and pleaded with him. He didn't just run to the prodigal, he walked to the field to meet the faithful one who stayed. And so in verse 31, a different translation, and if you would just hear this. Just hear the Father saying, my child, you are always with me, and all I have is yours. That's what God does for us. He sees you in the field, even if you feel unseen, overlooked, or weary. His joy isn't just for those who have wandered, but it's for you too. And so would you feel the Lord is stepping towards you even now?